Welcome back to the Santiago Boys. I'm your host, Evgeny Morozov. In this episode, we continue exploring a group of radical engineers around Salvador Allende. They're building their own digital utopia, one telex machine at a time. But they're up against some powerful forces. The country's rich and powerful elites, some far-right goons, American companies, the CIA, and of course, Richard Nixon. Fortunately, they also have this secret weapon up their sleeve, the eccentric British management consultant Stafford. He designs this big, bold plan for Allende's own industrial internet. But whether he'll actually manage to implement that plan, or whether that plan would even help Chile, that remains anyone's guess. One thing is for sure, a year and a half after his inauguration, things do get interesting for Allende. He's been fighting against powerful foreign enemies for a long time, but he doesn't have much proof of their evil plans yet. Until one day, he gets a huge gift from an unlikely source.
In March of 1972, syndicated columnist Jack Anderson, who was then the most famous and feared investigative reporter in Washington, started an expose of ITT.
That's Mark Feldstein, an American journalist. He wrote a book about the feud between Anderson and Nixon. He tells us how Anderson got his hands on some documents showing how ITT and the CIA have been trying to undermine Allende's government. We've been reading from those documents throughout this podcast. And they do cause a massive scandal when they come out. It makes international headlines, but no one is more outraged than the people of Chile.
Protesters descended on Santiago. They quoted from Jack Anderson's memos. They burned banners that had ITT's letters on it. The government starts an investigation.
Now Nixon hates Anderson and Allende more than ever. He's plotting his revenge. He can't stand the idea of them working together. And he's ready to do anything to stop them. Anything. In the middle of it all, Stafford Beer finds himself in Santiago. Bugging going on, he writes cryptically in his notebook. When strangers start snooping around his Intac office, he decamps to his Sheraton suite. Because, nothing protects you from spying quite like an ITT-owned hotel. True to form, Stafford implores his Chilean collaborators to use a code system when sending him telex messages back to the UK. And not just any code system, a system based on Shakespeare. Thus, he assigns himself and his colleagues different characters from the Bard's plays. And of course, he's Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, who can decide what to do. Talk about taking dark tech to a whole new level. You'll surely find it amusing, so here's a sample of what one such update from Santiago to London reads like.
Lear pressing for Hamlet monologue to be installed in torture chamber. Main source at Recursion 3 reluctant on grounds of the audience. They still feel that torture tools must be further studied. King Richard has been unavailable. Henry VIII facing troubles and might reshuffle the team.
Torture tools? Really? Let's hope it's just a reference to some high-tech gadgetry. While Stafford may not yet have started the revolution that Allende has been hoping for, his trips have certainly sparked a revolution of a different kind, one that is capturing the attention of Stafford's own family and friends across the pond.
Stafford would write me this stuff and send me rather wistful postcards with very good poems on them. And then I realized that, yes, something big was happening in his life.
This is Vanilla Beer.
I'm the eldest of Stafford's many children, the eldest survivor. The first child was stillborn, much to his distress. That changed his life quite a lot, I think.
Growing up as the eldest child of a famous management consultant does have its perks.
Stafford would broadcast from time to time or be on the telly. And after that, people would ring the house. The family would ring in to say, saw you, it was very good, that kind of thing.
Before his time in Chile, Stafford Beer was a man on a mission. He was busy consulting, broadcasting, and of course, writing about cybernetics. He had no time for anything else. He was all work.
He didn't watch movies at all. He didn't do downtime. I mean, like he didn't read fiction, He was writing and thinking and working. He didn't have time for all that stuff.
But busy as he is, Stafford always finds time for his most beloved possession, a luxurious Rolls-Royce.
I remember the smell of the leather, all the woodwork, all the little bar and the dashboard, they were all in walnut. I like walnut, walnut wood, that swirly wood.
Despite his professed political beliefs, Stafford sees no issue whatsoever with indulging in luxury. In fact, he justifies it as a way to support the economy.
I knew it was extraordinarily expensive. And when I asked Stafford about this, he said, and I remember what he said, that it gave work to 60 men for 2 years to build it.
The man behind the wheel of this stunning car is no longer a mere management consultant. That fateful letter from Flores has turned his world completely upside down.
He loved Chile. He loved Chilean women. He loved the climate. He loved the music. He loved he loved it.
Stafford Beer is a man of science and logic. He doesn't care much for stories or imagination. But something changes when his Chilean friends give him a copy of 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He's drawn into the magical world of Macondo, where anything could happen. He even tweaks his secret codes based on the book. And his old friend Fernando Flores, well, he's no longer referred to as Richard III, based on Shakespeare. Now the messages refer to him as Aureliano, one of the protagonists of the Garcia Marquez's novel. A lot has indeed changed for Stafford Beer.
There is a way in which these things blow up on me, and I ask myself, well, it's my fault, that the country goes into chaos as soon as I arrive.
This is Stafford himself in one of those moments when he's trying to make sense of this whole Chilean chapter of his life. A chapter that would truly change everything for him. But how does someone like Stafford even end up in a place like this? A place where nothing makes sense, where everything is unpredictable. A place that's the opposite of what he's used to. Let's face it, he's not some naive fool. He's a smart guy, a successful guy. He went to a fancy school, he was a rising star in the army. He hangs out with the elite at the Athenaeum Club. Does he not see what's coming? How does he not realize what he's getting into? It starts with a familiar tale, the tension between science and business, the pursuit of knowledge versus the pursuit of profit. And yet, for Stafford Beer, this conflict would have far-reaching consequences. Stafford's early career is indeed defined by a bold vision to use computers and real-time data analysis in order to revolutionize the steel industry. He'll just need to record everything that happens in the factory, or almost everything, including, of course, what the workers are doing. The problem is, his superior, who probably fears the backlash from the trade unions, hates this idea. We've got a recording of Stafford reflecting on that early traumatic experience. Apologies for the sound quality, but I do think it's a story worth hearing.
The guy said, are you mad? Don't you know we had a strike when we tried to produce a work study? A time and motion study, it was called in those days. The men down tools and don't do that, and it's absolutely unthinkable.
You can almost hear the skepticism in the union's collective sigh. They've been down this road before, lured in by the same empty promises of better working conditions, better wages, better everything. But Stafford isn't like the others. He used computers to benefit the workers, not to increase managerial control over them. He won't even retain any of the data gathered about the workers. And remember, in those days, this data was stored on physical tapes. So Stafford will even let the workers destroy those tapes after all the most important insights at the macro level have been drawn from them.
When we had done the analysis, which would be done in the presence of the unions, they could have the tapes. And they took the tapes and they had a ceremonial bonfire.
Stafford Beer's brilliance is both a blessing and a curse. His technological innovations revolutionize productivity and do save his company a fortune. But at the same time, they draw the attention of top management, and not in a good way. And now, Stafford is also outraged that the workers aren't getting their share.
The management were pocketing all this money. And after I'd made huge representations and said, look here, the men who've done this should get a cut, they got a bonus which was exactly equivalent to a packet of cigarettes a week.
That's clearly not how he expected workers to be rewarded for all their collaboration. Stafford puts up with this for a while, but eventually even his patience runs out. The thing is that he wants to experiment and innovate, but most of such efforts run into the corporate wall. His superiors think that he's a troublemaker, and they probably have a point. They want him to stop rocking the boat and just work quietly, make money, get himself a nice house and a car, and join the country club. But once Stafford hears his boss telling him that to his face, more or less using the language I've just given you, he realizes that he doesn't belong there anymore. And so he quits. After all, he fancies himself a scientist, someone with a vision of a better, more cybernetic way to manage complex systems. But his vision is not shared by everyone. He faces resistance and frustration at almost every turn. So naturally, he does want to break free from hierarchy and bureaucracy and all of these boring regulations and the profit-making and all the rules that he hated so much in his corporate life. And once liberated from all of this, he also wants to make a difference in the world. So with that initial letter from Fernando Flores, he gets an offer that he's been awaiting for years now. An offer to build his own utopia in a faraway land. A land where he can experiment with his ideas and finally see them actually implemented. A land called Chile. Back in Washington, where the ITT scandal is brewing, Jack Anderson's revelations are definitely causing a stir. As a result, all those internal memos and telexes that reveal ITT's misdeeds begin to circulate widely. And one person who acts on them is Orlando Letelier, Chile's ambassador in Washington. He knows this is big. He knows this could help his friend and ultimately his boss, Salvador Allende, reframe the global conversation, get some sympathy from the world. And so he sends those memos back to Chile, where they become a sensation. In fact, they even become a best-selling book, with everybody talking about ITT, the CIA, and all of their dirty tricks. The Anderson-Nixon feud has been brewing for a while even before the Chilean revelations. But things are really coming to a head now. Mark Feldstein explains.
Nixon was deranged when it came to Jack Anderson, and he ordered his staff to smear Anderson, and the staff complied.
Nixon's team accused Anderson, a devout Mormon with 9 kids, of being gay. This doesn't fly, of course, so they changed tack.
They planted a spy in his office to try to rifle through papers and get something on him. They discussed planting a memo that was false, a fake memo on White House stationery.
This doesn't work either.
So finally, they turned to the one method of silencing Anderson, guaranteed to be permanent, assassination.
One controversial CIA operative takes the lead in brainstorming potential methods.
He wanted to put LSD on Jack Anderson's steering wheel so that Anderson would absorb it when he was driving his car, and he'd have a hallucination and crash his car and hopefully die. In either case, be discredited when it came out that he was taking LSD.
Eventually, they decide to murder him on the streets of Washington. A mugging gone wrong would be easy to fake. But Anderson's publications set off a chain reaction in Washington itself. The Senate now wants to know more about what ITT and the CIA have been up to in Chile, and they're not taking no for an answer. No, they're asking for all kinds of documents that could expose this whole scheme to prevent Allende from even reaching presidency. But ITT is not giving up without a fight. They have lawyers working around the clock in order to deal with the Senate's demands for documents. And some of those lawyers are not at all happy with what they find. In fact, they're shocked by how deeply ITT's involvement with the CIA runs. And they're thinking about going public with all of it. And that makes ITT and the CIA very nervous. So nervous, in fact, that they start talking again. They're even brainstorming how to hide the most damaging of those papers. Papers that could blow this whole thing wide open. As the tension between Allende and Nixon reaches a boiling point, Chilean diplomats in America are definitely feeling the hit. They're being spied on, harassed, and burglarized. Orlando Letelier, the Chilean ambassador to the US, is about to find out that his embassy is not at all a safe place. Just a few months after the ITT hearings, someone breaks into the embassy, stealing some books and even a radio. But why do that if that's all they wanted? Is Allende about to lose yet another dark tech battle? So the Senate investigates the incident, and they discover something rather strange. Some congressional staffers even suspect that this is no random break-in. It might be part of some secret operation. But what kind of operation? And who are these burglars anyway? Well, there is one guy who benefits from all this mess, Jack Anderson, the journalist who Nixon hates. He had these guys following him around, trying to dig up dirt on him, or worse. But now they get a new mission.
Suddenly they got orders that there was something more important they had to do, and that was to break into the Watergate offices of the Democratic Party. And they did that instead, 6 weeks later, got arrested, and the rest is history.
But here's this thing that's been bugging some people for decades. Could it be that the same guys who broke into the Chilean embassy were also involved in the Watergate break-in? Is there a connection between these two events? Well, there is some evidence that suggests that there might be. And Nixon himself, to be honest, has dropped some hints that this was indeed the case. But who knows, really? The Cold War was weird like that, with or without dark tech. While Allende and Nixon are battling it out on the global stage, Stafford is expanding his horizons back in Santiago. He's in Chile for a job, sure, but he's also keen to explore its culture, and its beaches, and its drinks, and of course its politics. But there is one thing that he surely knows better than the Chileans, and he doesn't need any lessons on it: technology. He's a tech guy, after all. He knows how to make it work and how to make it sell. But does he really know what technology means and how it comes about and how it's connected to power? The Santiago Boys may not be up to date on the latest tech trends, but they're ahead of Stafford in terms of the big things, the big picture. They see technology as more than just gadgets and machines. They see it as a tool of power and domination. They take their cues from a theory that explains how technology keeps poor countries poor and rich countries rich. Dependency theory, they call it. At the time, this form of radical economics is popular in certain leftist circles, and it sees technology as just geopolitics by other means. Gabriel Rodriguez remembers why engineers like himself were so attracted to it.
For the first time, economists talking, we engineers saying, aha, you are talking about technology. I know about that.
The way dependency theorists see it, technology isn't just a path to progress. It's also a way to keep some countries down and make them dependent on others. Especially poor countries that don't have much of their own technology. They have to use what the rich countries give or sell them. And that comes with a price. You know how economists always talk about industrialization as the key to growth and development? Well, these dependency theorists say that it's not enough. Sure, you can have factories in Latin America making cars from Germany or Italy or the US. But what does it really mean? If all the parts and designs for those cars come from somewhere else, you're still paying a lot of money to use the ideas and inventions. And you're still at the mercy of those who own them. Is that really progress? Or is it just another way of being exploited? As one clever guy said back then, a Volkswagen Republic is not very different from a banana republic. Thus, without their own technological base, poor nations are doomed to underdevelopment. And it's a situation that young and politically aware engineers, our own Santiago Boys, are hoping to change. In Santiago, dependency theory has taken the town by storm, and it's not difficult to see why. With the arrival of prominent economists fleeing Brazil's political upheaval, Chilean universities have become a breeding ground for this revolutionary idea. And it's safe to say that the Santiago Boys, including Gabriel Rodriguez, are all in.
They had a lot of influence in Chile, the Brazilians.
Before long, Gabriel is even teaching a course about it.
We invented courses in the Faculty of Engineering, and the first one was Development and Dependency. That I was the professor, and my second in command was Eugenio Ruiz-Tagle.
Fernando Flores, too, includes a chapter on dependency in his thesis, tucking it somewhere between his quotations of Che Guevara and his reflections on industrial management. Guy Bonsiep is likewise a dependency theory devotee, and he makes his views known on the pages of Intech's own in-house magazine. Sounding like a true believer, he argues against the blind copying of foreign technologies. He warns that this might perpetuate dependency. Technological autonomy is a much better goal, and he still beats that drum today.
You see, for me, design work, or design work particularly in these peripheral countries, has to do with a political concept of autonomy.
But what does autonomy really mean here? Above all, it means building your own technological base.
It can be done and should be done, a local development of science and technology. If you want to get out of this development under development contradiction, you see.
Dependency theorists have found a powerful ally in Salvador Allende himself. He passionately champions Chile's need to break free from the shackles of foreign dependence. But he also complains about the lack of technological progress in the country. Today, proclaims Allende in one of his powerful speeches, our capacity for the creation of technology is far from adequate as the result of our history of dependence. The solution, according to Allende, lies in defending Chile's technological sovereignty, and also, I quote, strengthening our own scientific and technological capacity. He wants Chile to have control over its own technological destiny, and not just accept whatever is offered by the ITTs of the world. He said it himself, we demand the right to seek our own solutions. And that's still a very powerful message for today, mired as we are in the trap of technological solutionism. So while everyone in Santiago is wondering what it means to have a computer run the economy, Stafford is flying back and forth between Chile and England, enjoying the perks of his new job. A menu from one of those flights has even made it to his personal archive. It has things like duck liver with truffles and rabbit with mustard sauce. You can bet that the socialist government of Allende is not too proud of all those luxurious dinners. Can Stafford be munching on empanadas like everyone else? On one of those trips, Stafford gets a call from the British embassy. And they want to see him right away. They even send a fancy car to pick him up. He's kind of a big deal in Santiago by now. Everyone's heard about him. But he's not your typical Brit. He passes for Latin American now. He talks with his hands, he hugs everyone, he even wears some colorful sweaters. So these diplomats are in for a big surprise, like the rest of Britain. Or so Vanilla Beer tells us.
Stafford was more welcomed abroad because the Brits were suspicious of his flamboyance. He was a big man and given to emotional hugs and outbreaks of emotionality, in a rational way, of course. But the Brits don't like it. They like their people sullen.
In Chile, Stafford finally lets his flamboyant side out.
They didn't know the British people mostly weren't like this, so they would take him as for what they saw.
This is Jonathan Rosenhead, who's been friends and colleagues with Stafford ever since hearing him talk as a student at his college. Stafford's Chilean friends, he says, wouldn't stand for any of this British stiffness.
They would say, here's this extraordinary person, and we'll take him as an extraordinary person. They didn't feel threatened in their identity by somebody behaving like that.
Stafford's only problem is that his wife Sally is not at all thrilled about this Chilean adventure. Vanilla Beer explains.
She didn't get any of it. I mean, poor girl, she was quite young, and she married a man who had a big car and a swimming pool and was successful, and the roots to that money didn't bother her at all. She just got a prize.
Well, Sally may have just gained some valuable allies. That meeting at the British embassy goes horribly wrong. Diplomats surely weren't ready to hear Stafford rave about Allende. They must have been outraged by the socialist ideology of this capitalist rebel. So much so that they won't even be giving him a lift in that official car. Yes, he'll be taking a taxi. The British embassy may soon be breathing a sign of relief, though, as Stafford's efforts to recruit more Brits to join Cybersyn fall flat. Not everyone is as excited about socialist empanadas as he is, apparently. Stafford's frustration is palpable in the letter that he writes to the team.
As I feared, it will prove difficult to obtain people on a long-term basis. The press is full of alarmist reports about Chile, and these cause concern for me with wives and children. Everyone, married or single, is concerned about financial stability, seen as a function of political stability.
It's not every day that such a groundbreaking project comes along. So why so little British interest in joining Cybersyn? Allende's reputation is certainly not helping, let's face it. But could there be something else at play? Is there something we don't yet know about this management consultant? Something that is giving potential candidates cold feet? It's hard to discuss Stafford without running into the British elite, and his own family is no exception. Enter Ian, his younger brother and the former headmaster in some of the fanciest schools in the UK. He's the kind of person who tests his microphone with this kind of usual what I had for breakfast story.
I have muesli because it was introduced to me by Kurt Hahn, who was the founder of Gordonston. He was the headmaster for the Duke of Edinburgh. He was Prince Charles's headmaster. Prince Charles didn't really like the school. And that's enough.
So what is it like for this member of the British establishment to have Stafford as his brother? Ian finds the answer the hard way, mostly at various dinner parties that he's obliged to attend. We all know the rule, right? Politics is off the menu at the dinner table. Unless, of course, you're Ian Beer and you're trying to glean insights on cybernetics from a member of the Conservative Party. But when Ian mentions his brother, Stafford, a celebrated expert in the field, the atmosphere around the table shifts dramatically.
I steered the conversation into that direction. And then I said to this member of the cabinet, I said, what do you make, for example, of Stafford beer? Good God, the man exploded. He said the most bogus man in the whole of England.
People have been criticizing Stafford beer for a long time, and it's not just a fringe view. Some British civil servants even refer to him as the biggest charlatan in the business. That's the exact quote. And we're talking early 1960s here. Others have been joking that Sigma, that's the name of the consulting company that he runs back then, actually stands for Stafford is going mad again, and not science in general management, as it's actually meant to be. And you can kind of see why they would say that. Stafford Beer is a weird dude. He does some odd things. Like this one time, he was at a meeting with these big shots from a steel company. It's a board meeting, in fact. That doesn't deter Stafford. He decides to put on one of his acts, and a very impressive one. Sorry once again for the audio quality. It's an old recording.
I remember after a United Steel board meeting, I had all the directors scampering around on their hands and knees on the floor trying to catch beetles and things, and I was working with an ultrasonic whistle in my pocket.
Who does that? And at a board meeting of a company that you work for? Getting board members on their knees and in pursuit of beetles guided by an ultrasonic whistle? What is this? A Monty Python sketch? But while Stafford has his fair share of detractors, his admirers are just as numerous. Ian Beery recalls a dinner party where he seated next to a member of the Labour Party, and the responses were overwhelmingly positive.
I said to him, what do you make of Stafford beer? And he said, do you know Stafford beer? So I said, well, yeah, I do. I said, reasonably well. I said, he's my brother. Goodness me, he said, you lucky man. He said, he's the finest thinker in the whole of England.
So, given this favorable attitude, it's not surprising that at some point, the Labour Party wants Stafford to write this big report on how to fix the civil service. It's strange that they're actually turning to him, knowing how much the civil service itself actually hates the guy. Stafford knows that the Labour leaders who do want to work with him have something of a dilemma here. I quote, "They have been trying to find a way of incorporating my explosive character in government affairs without bringing the civil service down in a heap." So yes, he does propose daring reforms of the civil service, and, of course, he immediately faces pushback. Pushback that makes him question whether bureaucracy and democracy can actually truly coexist.
I was very worried about that report, which is why I never published it. It was wide open to the charge of elitism. I've never resolved this. If you really want to change the world, how can you do it without creating an elite? And yet, this is rather opposed to my basic principles.
Stafford is not alone facing this tough question. It's a dilemma that is well known to Salvador Allende. In fact, as we looked at the clash between lofty ideals and the realities of governance, we see both Allende and Stafford Beer caught in a perilous balancing act. How do you maintain the balance between technocracy and democracy? How do you balance the power of experts and algorithms with the voice and will of the people? And how do you keep your democratic dream alive without turning it into a technocratic nightmare? Or worse, losing it to chaos? As his talent surge reaches a fever pitch, Stafford's peers begin to wane. But just as he's ready to throw in the towel, a glimmer of hope appears. A London-based engineer from Brazil has expressed keen interest in joining CyberSyn. Maybe, just maybe, a non-British perspective is the key to igniting passion for Allende's socialist spoons. Enter Carlos Senna, a man who's no stranger to coups and right-wing machinations.
We were under a military dictatorship. They were killing people, torturing political prisoners. It was awful, unbearable. We decided to denounce this practice in Brazil.
As a young engineer in the post-coup Brazil, he helps document these horrific acts. But when his cover is blown, Carlos must flee to London for safety. While there, he meets Jonathan Rosenhead, a member of Stafford's extended fan club, and he learns about the extraordinary CyberSyn project. And unlike his British peers, Carlos is elated to get involved. With a sense of purpose, Carlos makes his way to CyberSyn's London hub, ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead.
I went to the Athenaeum and I found a shrine, a beautiful shrine, with a neoclassical building, with a portico, and a statue of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, golden Athena on top.
The Athenaeum might not be the most revolutionary spot in London, but as far as discussions about the future of Chile's cybernetic revolutions go, that's probably the spot.
I entered the Athenaeum, and who was there after I crossed some rooms with the, cut-class people working like this, people from top ladder, from top drawer, and snobbish as hell. And Stafford was there, in a leather sofa, with his cigar, plenty of ashes and smoke and papers.
The sparks are flying as Stafford and Carlos bond over their shared love of cybernetics and Latin America and so much else. Next thing you know, Stafford is extending Carlos and his wife an invitation to visit his extravagant mansion in that famous stockbroker belt. This initial meeting would lead to some profound changes in Carlos's own life. But we are jumping too much ahead. Back in Santiago, the plans for the operations room hit a snag. The challenges facing Allende's government are mounting, and it begs the question, will this cybernetic war room even make any difference? Will it arrive in time to save the day? Or will it be just one of those vanity projects, and one that will probably never work? Well, one thing is clear. The very problem that this room is aiming to solve, instability, is already rampant. The Chilean economy is getting worse and worse, so much so that even Stafford's magic cybernetic software might not be able to help it.
The government's attempt to rev up purchasing power, to rev up consumer demand, meant that demand frequently outstripped supply, even in moments in which production seemed to be doing quite well.
Joshua Franz Strink, the historian from the University of Texas, points to inflation as the most pressing problem.
The government was also printing a tremendous amount of new money throughout 1971 and into 1972, really in an attempt to keep its different social welfare programs afloat, was spending money on new, recently socialized industries. And that monetary pressure leads to rising inflation, of the likes of which Chile had not seen in several decades.
The scarcity is causing hoarding and speculation, leading the government to create neighborhood groups called hubs or jobs to monitor shopkeepers and also prevent merchants from fleecing customers. This is people's power reasserting itself where the technocrats' power falls short.
The first objective was to monitor the consumer marketplace, to serve as sort of watchdogs against unscrupulous merchants who were potentially speculating with basic consumer goods, things like food, meat, non-perishables, and other things.
With all of the celebration of people's power, the militants of MIR actually rejoice as these watchdogs, run by citizens of course, assume more functions. For Miristas, it's the step that the Allende revolution should have taken long time ago. They should have involved the people, the workers, the peasants, the true sources of Allende's support after all, and have them play a much more active role in governance. So, sure, it's good that they have finally become part of the political map, but it would have been even nicer if they were let in before the occurrence of this major crisis.
These groups, the HOP, the Juntas de Abastecimiento y Precios, also served a critical role in distributing food and other consumer goods to communities that lived on the margin of the national economy.
But not everyone is happy with this arrangement. Some shopkeepers feel like they're being harassed and spied on by these Japs. They feel like their freedom and dignity are being violated. They accuse the government of terrible things, of trying to destroy the middle classes, trying to impose a socialist dictatorship. When one striking shopkeeper dies of a heart attack, the strike quickly sparks violence in the streets. Someone even sets fire to a trolley bus, turning it into a flaming wreck. It's a shocking sight that makes people wonder what else is in store for this troubled country. As for Allende, things don't look that bright for him. He promised to bring harmony and justice to Chile, but instead he faces chaos and conflict. His dream of creating a new society, a society based on cooperation and solidarity, seems more distant than ever. The only thing that still holds some promise is Stafford Beer's cybernetic utopia. But could it really work? Back in the UK, the Brazilian engineer Carlos Senna is journeying along a secluded roadway flanked by ancient birch trees. He's on his way to Stafford's sprawling estate. The area is known for its lush golf courses, not exactly the most revolutionary of environments.
His address, I can remember, was Firkins Old Avenue. Firkins Old Avenue. Firkins is some volume of beer.
You think of a place where a political revolution is brewing, and you picture something exciting, something dangerous. But this place is none of that. It's just a quiet spot where the Guinness family, yes, that Guinness family, plays tennis at a nearby club. That's how Vanilla Beer remembers it.
I mean, we did know the neighbours. I remember playing croquet with one of them. English game, you play on a lawn. It's boring. God almighty.
No wonder Stafford Beer is so drawn to the excitement of Latin American socialism. It's sort of hard to lead a revolution when your neighbor's idea of rebellion is just hitting a ball with a stick on the lawn. But inside his study, a whole new world comes to life. The walls, a deep blue and orange, are adorned with rows of bookshelves, and the scent of burning incense, a nod to his love of sensory experiences, fills the air. It's a habit he got in India while stationed there at the end of the Second World War. To Stafford, this study is his own miniature version of the operations room he's building in Santiago.
Stafford ran the house from his study, which he regarded as a control room. And he had intercoms. This is, primitive technology. We would regard it as now, but in the day it was state of the art. So each of our bedrooms had a little telecom thing in it, and he would ring us from his study. It was a big house.
The cybernetic mansion leaves Carlos deeply impressed. It looks like something straight out of the famous novel by Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Stafford clapped his hand once, and the lights turned on. He clapped twice, and a fountain in the middle of the living room started operating with splashes of water, around which there was displayed the numbers of the Fibonacci series. So I said, this is a ship of Captain Nemo. And Stafford is Captain Nemo. He lives in London now. Nobody knows, but I do. I do know that Captain Nemo lives in London in his ship full of wonders.
Carlos Senna is in awe of the mansion he's visiting. It has everything you can imagine and more. But Carlos is not here just for the indoor pool or the goldfish or the remote control waterfall. All of them are present, of course. No, he's here for something else. Something that makes his mouth water and his eyes sparkle. Stafford is treating Carlos to a pisco sour, Chile's most famous alcoholic drink.
Then he came with a small cup and a tiny liquefier, tiny device in which he mixed the white egg and cinnamon and pisco.
So it looks like Stafford hasn't been wasting his time in Santiago. He must have been to more than a couple of bars. And as the night wears on, Stafford waxes poetic about his love for Chile. So much so that the wife of Carlos suspects that there may be more to this fascination with the country than what seems on the surface.
She said, "There's a woman in Chile. Nobody is so passionate without loving a girl in Chile."
Maybe she's right. Maybe Stafford has fallen in love with more than just the country. But Carlos also notices something else about Stafford. Something rather disturbing, at least in light of his grandiose plans.
Well, I think Stafford was rather naive in politics. He was so much embedded in his thoughts on cybernetics and mathematics and the origins of cybernetics and writing and given his being keynote speakers in several events.
How does someone like this even become a trusted advisor of Allende? Can this old-school socialist trust this member of the British elite? Will he stay on their side when the push really comes to shove? But in Santiago, another crisis erupts. There is this plane that's been hijacked by some radical leftists from Argentina. They have hostages on board and they land in Santiago. And Allende has to deal with the situation somehow. He doesn't want to look weak, but on the other hand, he doesn't want to betray his leftist allies. So he does something kind of crazy. He sends his daughter Beatriz to the airport with a present for one of the leaders of the hijackers. It's a gun. Yeah, a gun. As the hijacked plane sits on the tarmac, Allende is stuck between a rock and a hard place. He can't send them back to Argentina, where they'll face certain death. But he also can't let them stay in Chile, where they'll anger his enemies in the military and elsewhere. So what is he going to do? The big problem kind of goes away on its own, but tragically so. The Argentinian government executes the friends of some of those hijackers, the ones who couldn't make it to the plane. And now Allende surely can't send the plane back to Argentina. Instead, he lets it fly to Cuba, where Castro naturally welcomes it. Problem solved. It's one of the many crises that plague Allende's presidency, but also a very telling one. His own military is losing faith in him, and it shows. They wonder if Allende has what it takes to lead a nation in turmoil. Why is he pandering to the radical left? And the most rabid of them are already convening in the port city of Valparaiso. That's where opposition to Allende runs strongest, particularly among the Navy. An anti-Allende general even contacts the US Embassy in Santiago, hoping to secure support for a potential coup. However, the US ambassador to Chile wants no part in it whatsoever. But when the reports of this reluctance reach Henry Kissinger, he knows that the ambassador is an idiot. Yes, an idiot. Kissinger must have been learning his manners from Richard Nixon. Soon, the CIA reports on another related coup plotting operation.
Patria Libertad and a substantial portion of the business community are undertaking actions to increase discontent and incidents of violence, especially in the Santiago area, in order to create an atmosphere in Chile which would be propitious for a military coup. The business leaders involved are trying to foment strikes and labor conflicts, while P&L will attempt to provoke incidents of violence.
60 days. Just 60 days. That's all they give Allende. Who has time for cybernetics amidst all this chaos? The future of Project Cybersyn rests on a knife's edge as the nation plunges further into turmoil. The whole team is grappling with this double task of having to complete this difficult project, while at the same time trying to serve a cause, a political cause that they believe in. Stafford himself finds all of this very, very hard, as he recounts later on.
I cut myself in two at this point, trying to serve the cause in which I by now believed on the one hand, and dedicated to the task of completing Project Cybersyn on the other. Somehow there had to be a union between them. The project was not in very good shape because of the political upheavals.
So in the middle of all this crisis, the Cybersyn team goes on a retreat in a nice place outside of Santiago. For Stafford, it's a moment of reckoning.
This meeting made it clear to all participants on the scientific side of the work that everything was dedicated to political ends, and many of them were very upset by this.
By then, Raúl Espejo has emerged as Stafford's right hand on all things cybersyn, and he can feel the unease that's brewing between cybersyn's technological aspirations and the political reality around them. Besides, not everyone working on Project Cybersyn is a supporter of Allende.
There were people from multiple ideological bases. There were several Christian Democrats, and I would say there were even people from the right.
Following the retreat, Stafford writes a memo with some piercing analysis on what lies ahead for Allende's cybernetic governance, and of course for the role that the cybersyn team would play in it. It's a memo to the whole team where Stafford also outlines quite a few of very bold and ambitious recommendations.
Never mind that no one in the Chilean government has really asked for his opinion on anything other than cybernetics.
Here's one such recommendation.
The wishes of the people will be made known to the government at all times. We shall use technology, which belongs to the people, to do it.
Here's another.
We shall replace bureaucracy with a precise and clear network of officials whose only job is to help, to give answers.
Replacing bureaucracy with a network of officials? That's definitely not the job that Stafford was hired for. Mind you, hired by the very bureaucracy that he wants to replace now. But if there is a bureaucrat to serve as a key node on that new cybernetic network of officials, it's surely Enrique Farné. As a multitasking bureaucrat, Enrique always finds himself in the middle of a political storm, without even a fancy ergonomic chair to comfort him.
I was young, I was very, very committed. And I was working in the middle of where all these things, political things, acts of terrorism and the opposite, all of them.
For example, when strikes shut down supermarkets, Enrique forces them to stay open.
And it was brutal because, sometimes, you will get thrown steel bullets and so on.
When workers occupy a milk factory, Enrique is the one to reason with them.
I had to go late and go there and explain, compañeros, comrades, this is not the way to do it. This is not the way that Allende has indicated. This is the weapon for the opposition. And that's what they want you to do.
Part of the broader Santiago Boys universe, Enrique is one of Allende's invisible but faithful technocrats. He's one of those tireless, unsung, and creative heroes who keep this government from crumbling. And soon, he too will join Project Cybersyn. Allende knows he doesn't have much time left. He knows the CIA and the military are plotting against him. He knows his country is on the brink of collapse. But he doesn't let them stop him from having some fun. He jokes around with his friends. He plays pranks on them as always. He even steals a suit of armor from a rich acquaintance of his. He acts like nothing is wrong, like he's still in charge, like he can still make a difference. But he can't. And deep down he must know it. The 60-day deadline is quickly approaching, and the machinery for his downfall is already set in motion. A secret document from the CIA reveals just how hopeless his situation is.
The possibility of military intervention in Chile in the near future is greater now than at any time since President Allende came into power. Discontent among the general population, especially in Santiago, is high as a result of the deteriorating economic situation and conflicts between the government and the political opposition.
With right-wing military coups rocking Bolivia and Ecuador, Chile might as well be next. Despite the political turmoil that surrounds him, Stafford Beer falls in love with Chile. He loves the music, he loves the literature, he even tries to translate some of their poems and songs into English. For Stafford, these are life-changing connections. His daughter Vanilla recalls,
his idea of friendship was someone you played chess with, someone you talked with and sparred with.
It takes a trip across the ocean for him to discover that life is not all chess games and strategy.
He once said to me, "Your friends mean a lot to you, don't they?" And I said, "Yeah," thinking, hey, why not? And he said, "Mine don't." He's very gloomy about it. But that was then, that was before Chile.
One can't help but wonder what other transformations are lying in store for this guru of management cybernetics. For now, Stafford is determined to get his new Brazilian friend Carlos to join the CyberSyn team, and do so as soon as possible.
Stafford invited me to go to Chile, and he said, well, just wait for a note from the Chileans. I'm going to Chile now, because he went back and forth all the time.
Days turn into weeks, Carlos is hyped up about this whole thing, and then the fateful message finally arrives. It's a telex from Corfu.
We wish you to come here. Go to the consulate. The contract is there. Talk to the consul. Sign it and give it back through the consulate as well.
Carlos does as he's asked, only to find out the hard way that the Chilean diplomats, yes, the people working for the government, are up to no good.
And the consul said, no, there's nothing here. I'm sorry, my friend. There's nothing here. I kept asking for the contract. And there was a boycott, I noticed quite soon. He didn't want nobody to go and to be a collaborator with Allende. He received the contract and he kept it in his drawer.
Carlos is undeterred by the risk and sets out for Chile without a visa, but not before making a special trip to Geneva to say goodbye to his Brazilian comrades.
And there I met Paulo Freire.
This is the Paulo Freire, the revered philosopher of education with a unique insight into the Chilean political landscape.
And Paulo Freire said, I'm just coming from Chile, don't go, because there will be a coup over there. It's awful, the situation.
With the words of Paulo Freire still ringing in his ears, Carlos decides to delay his journey to Chile. He sends a letter to Stafford to explain why. In it, he warns of the dangers posed by the likes of Patria y Libertad. He also argues that, as a South American, he can hardly believe that the army is unconditionally democratic. Somehow, perhaps because of his early experiences during the coup in Brazil in 1964, Carlos understands Chile much better than many of its own citizens. And he hasn't even traveled there yet. That's Allende's Chile for you. A country where politics is everything and nothing is simple. A country where the stakes are high and the risks are higher. A country where no one can predict what will happen tomorrow. And so, what's going to happen next? Will Allende manage to hold on to his presidency? Or will he be overthrown by this radical group that calls itself Patria y Libertad? Will he be overthrown by someone else altogether? And what about Project CyberSyn and its team of young engineers? Can they keep Allende's vision alive as his enemies close in? Or will they too be swept away by history? On the next episode of the Santiago Boys, Allende is in trouble. Another strike rocks Chile to its core, and this time it will have profound consequences. Allende turns to our own Santiago Boys for help. And help they will. As a result, Fernando Flores rises to power and influence. Stafford, in turn, goes all in on his futuristic plan, further alienating the Chilean bureaucrats. But to be honest, that's the least of his problems, for much trouble is also brewing at home, back in Britain. Don't go anywhere. You won't want to miss the next episode of the Santiago Boys. Stay tuned. The Santiago Boys is a co-production of Cora Media and Post Utopia. Writing, research, development, and presentation, Evgeny Morozov. Music main theme, Luca Michele. Audio editing and post-production, Guido Bertolotti. Music supervisor, Luca Michele. Post-production assistant, Luca Possi. Post-production producer, Matteo Salsa. The people helping me with organizing, recording, and processing hundreds of interviews are unfortunately too many to name here. But I'd like to extend special thanks to Chiara Di Leone, Ekais Cancela, Nikolai Maximchuk, and Matteo Miavaldi. All of them have helped me in more than one way. Full credits are also available on the podcast website, the-santiago-boys.com.